All right, week 5 is in the books. We are on to week 6 already of the 2023 college football season. Today's Monday, and that means it's time to update the top 25. Let's go. All right, here it is, this week's top 25. The official Uncle Lou ranking. The first thing you're probably going to notice, Georgia at 8. I've been moving Georgia down the last couple of weeks. It's not that I think Georgia is bad. It's not that I don't think Georgia can win all their games or win their division or win the SEC or make the playoffs. I still think Georgia can do all of those things. But my rankings aren't a projection of what I think is going to happen down the road. My rankings are a projection of what I've seen so far this season. And now that we are a full month into the season, most teams have played 5 games. Some have played 6. Some have played 4 if they've already had a bye week. But point is, we've seen enough football now to where you don't need to, and really you're doing a disservice if you are relying on anything from past seasons or preseason expectations or anything like that to rank these teams. I get that there are some people who think that, well, Georgia's won the national title twice in a row, so they should stay number 1 until somebody beats them. I just don't believe in that philosophy. I don't believe in it when other teams win the national title. I don't believe it when Georgia wins the national title. I had Georgia ranked number 1 heading into the season just like everybody else did because, well, they won 2 national titles in a row. They recruited an elite level. They had a bunch of playmakers coming back. You looked at their schedule. It didn't look all that difficult compared to some other schedules, so it felt like 1 was a fair place to put Georgia. And I feel like I gave Georgia the benefit of the doubt for several weeks of the season. But like I said, we've seen a full month of football now, and there really is no legitimate argument to make in my mind that Georgia is or should be ranked number 1 in the 2023 college football season, not based on anything we've seen this season. I've got no issue with anybody that has Georgia at 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or all the way down where I have them at 8. This will ruffle some of the Georgia fans' feathers, but look, it doesn't really matter where you're ranked right now, not just in this ranking. It never matters where you're ranked in this ranking, but nothing really matters until the end, right? And Georgia, like every other team in this top 15, really, almost, has a chance to get where they want to go if they keep winning games, including Georgia. But Georgia hasn't played a single game this season, in my mind, where they looked like the number 1 team in the country. Using last season as an example, in the first month of the season last year, Georgia had a 49-3 win over Oregon, a top 10 team, a top 15 team. They completely dismantled a South Carolina team, 48-6 or something, whatever it was. In both of those games, you could make the argument that, and I remember making the argument, and a lot of other people were too, that, wow, Georgia looks like the best team in the country. That happened twice in the first month of the season last year. It hasn't happened a single time this season. That doesn't mean that Georgia can't go on, like I said, to win their division, win the conference, make the playoffs, and who knows from there. But through the first month of the season, there's no rational argument to make that Georgia's the best team in the country. So I moved them down. Why did I move them down to 8? I think I had them at 3 or 4 last week. Every single team that I've got ranked ahead of Georgia has looked better than Georgia at specific times this season, and over the course of the first full month of the season, they look better overall. I can point to, the Washington game where they only beat Arizona by 6 and then go, well, that's no different than Georgia beating Auburn by 7. Or I can look at the Florida State game. Well, they only beat Boston College by 2. Yes, you can make cases against every team ahead of Georgia. But you can also make cases for every team ahead of Georgia. And with Georgia, there is no case to be made that doesn't rely on last season. There's just not. There's no game this year that you can point to with Georgia. With Florida State, they've got the win over LSU. With Texas, they've got the win over Bama. Penn State has looked dominant in every game that they've played, and they beat Iowa 31 or 37 or nothing, whatever it was. And you go, oh, that's just Iowa. Well, Georgia's played Auburn and South Carolina. And did not look dominant in either game. Those are their only 2 Power 5 games. Oregon completely dismantled Colorado. That's more impressive than anything Georgia has done. Washington, talked about them already. Ohio State beat Notre Dame. That's more impressive than anything Georgia has done. Even Michigan. Admittedly, Michigan is dangling close to where Georgia is in that And I'll even admit I'm still giving Michigan some benefit of the doubt here from the last couple of seasons. They've made the playoffs 2 years in a row. They've won the Big Ten 2 years in a row. I haven't really seen Michigan have that marquee win this year. Now, they haven't had an opportunity to based on their schedule, but they also haven't had the close come-from-behind wins against bad teams that Georgia has had, which is why I have dropped Georgia to 8. Again, people can get mad or upset, just like they do every week when I make these rankings. If I don't have a certain team ranked where you think I should. If Georgia goes out and beats Kentucky this week, a team that's ranked in the top 25 of every single poll on earth right now, then maybe I move them back up. It like everything else, it's going to depend what happens around Georgia, right? You beat Auburn 27-20. That's not an impressive win. Well, it was at Auburn. Okay, it's just not an impressive win. I'm sorry. Beating South Carolina at home 24-14, not an impressive win. Down 14-3 at a half. You had to come back to win that thing by 10. Not impressive. Beat Kentucky, that would be Georgia's most impressive win. Beat Kentucky by 2 or 3 touchdowns, then you're talking about really something impressive there. Michigan beat Nebraska 45-7 this past week. Nebraska's relatable to an Auburn or a South Carolina. I think Auburn and South Carolina are both probably a little bit better than Nebraska, but not much better, right? Michigan wins 45-7. They play on the road at Minnesota this week. Texas beat a ranked Kansas team 40-14. Texas now has 2 wins better than any win Georgia has. Now, I'm not just ranking teams based on who has the best wins, but that's part of what goes into it. Obviously, the record is the most important part. That's the biggest part of my ranking is a team's record. It's not the only part, though, right? It can't be the only part. Otherwise, how do you differentiate between teams with the same record? So it's your record. It's who have you beat. It's how have you looked when you beat them. It's all of those things rolled up into one. Texas 40-14 over Kansas. They play Oklahoma this week. You see, I've got Oklahoma in the top 10. I've been higher on Oklahoma all year than either the AP or the coaches. I continue to be higher on Oklahoma than either the AP or the coaches. I'm not. We'll see what happens. I think, I'm leaning Texas in that game. I'll do my prediction videos later in the week. But I'm leaning Texas in that one right now. But I still think Oklahoma has looked really, really good. They got top 10 offense, top 10 defense, much improved over last year. They don't have a marquee win either. So that, I've got them below Georgia at 10. Would Georgia beat Oklahoma? I don't know. I can't say that for certain. I'm not 100% certain they would. I know they'd be favored. And I'd like Georgia, I like Georgia's chances, but I don't know for certain. But I've got Georgia ahead. I also don't think necessarily that Penn State or Florida State or Ohio State or Texas or Michigan would beat Georgia either. But this isn't a ranking of who would beat who. This is how I feel teams deserve to be ranked. Right now. I mentioned Oklahoma playing Texas. I've got them at 10. I've got Southern Cal at 9. I thought about dropping Southern Cal a little, but honestly, Utah losing, who I had right behind Southern Cal. Kind of tied my hands on that, so I sort of left them where they were at. I've got Southern Cal at 9. They did beat Colorado, but it was not pretty, particularly the second half. Southern Cal's defense has massive issues. It's a rinse and repeat season for Lincoln Riley. The playoffs are the ceiling. They're not winning a playoff game. That defense is just horrific. It is what it is. I've seen this Lincoln Riley team 8 times. This exact same Southern Cal team we're watching right now, I've seen it 8 times or whatever it is. Ever since he got the head coaching job at Oklahoma, it's the same team every year. Heisman-level quarterback, offense that plays at an elite level with skill position players out of this world, and a defense that can't get out of its own way. This is just literally a comedy of errors every year on defense. This is the same. But they're undefeated for now, and I think they can still make the playoffs. Like I said, I've seen this same Lincoln Riley team make the playoffs 3 times, but they won't win a playoff game. They play Arizona this coming week. Southern Cal at 9. Georgia at 8. Talked about them. Not a good win against Auburn. Now to get Kentucky at home, a chance to impress. We'll see what they can do. I've got Oregon at 7. They beat Stanford 42-6. 42-6. Now, they were trailing 6-0 in the second quarter, so maybe you want to hold that against them. But they didn't come back to win by 10 like Georgia did against South Carolina. They came back and dominated 142-6. They're on a bye week coming up, Oregon is. Washington finally had a week where they looked mortal. Washington had dominated on both sides of the ball every single week of the season so far this year. Not the case this week against Arizona. Now, the game was never really in doubt. It did feel like Washington kind of controlled the game. but unable to really put Arizona away, beating them 31-24. They're also on a bye this week. Just ahead of Washington, I've got Ohio State. I still think Ohio State's got one of the best wins of the year on the road at Notre Dame, a last second touchdown, literally. They were on a bye this past week, but they get Maryland this coming week. And Maryland should be ranked in a lot of people's polls. They're 5-0. They barely missed out on getting into mine. If you look at the bottom of my rankings here, I've got Missouri, Louisville, Fresno State, Kansas State. Maryland's capable of beating any of those teams. Maryland's a good team. I think Maryland could be who decides the Big Ten East, as weird as that sounds, right? Everyone talks about Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State for good reason as being the big three in the Big Ten East. Maryland is also in the Big Ten East. They're not on the level of those three, but, man, it seems like they might be good enough to beat one of those three teams, which could go a long way in determining who ends up winning that side of the division. But anyway, Ohio State will get a chance against them at home this week. They take on Maryland. Penn State, I've got them at 4. Another impressive win, this time on the road at Northwestern, 41-13. They've got a bye week coming up next week. I've got Texas at 3. Mentioned them beating Kansas. They play Oklahoma this coming week. Huge matchup, 12 o'clock on Saturday. And Florida State, I've got them at number 2. They had a bye week. They host Virginia Tech this coming week. So that's my top 10. Outside of my top 10, I've got Notre Dame and Alabama 11 and 12. Those are my 2 highest ranked one-loss teams. I thought about putting Notre Dame I thought about putting Alabama ahead of Notre Dame. I've got Notre Dame at 11, Alabama at 12. Notre Dame's got a better win right now than Alabama does. To me, that's what I'm using to separate those two games. Notre Dame's win on the road at Duke, to me, is more impressive than Alabama's win at home against Ole Miss, which is currently their best win. Washington State at 13. They also have one loss. North Carolina at 14, undefeated. Again, a lot of these can be moved up or down, a couple of spots up, a couple of spots down, and I'd have absolutely no argument. North Carolina's undefeated. Washington State has a loss. Shouldn't I move North Carolina ahead of Washington State? I don't know. Should I? Or no, Washington State doesn't have a loss. I'm sorry. They were on a bye this week. They're 4, and I was thinking of Oregon State. They beat Oregon State. But still, you can make a case to put North Carolina ahead of Washington State. Why I don't have them there, switch them if it makes you happier. Again, it gets really hard to differentiate some of these teams that have the exact same record. At 15, I've got Oregon State. They barely lost to Washington State, but then beat Utah handily this past weekend on a Friday night game, so I moved them back up. I had dropped them significantly when they lost to Washington State. They turned around, beat Utah, I moved them back up, got them at 15. 16, I've got Miami. Maybe Miami should be ahead of Alabama and Notre Dame. I don't know. They're undefeated. This is where it just gets really hard. You know, they handled Texas A&M, no problem. All of a sudden now Texas A&M looks like they might be a better team. What does that mean? Does that mean Miami's really good? I don't know. Again, a month is a lot of football, but in some cases we need to see more. Miami will have chances to prove itself in bigger games down the road. They were off this last weekend, so not really a chance to prove anything to anybody this past weekend. They play Georgia Tech this coming weekend. Should be a fairly easy win for Miami. Ole Miss at 17, big win over LSU, and they really needed that too after getting beat down by a wobbly Alabama team the week before. They come back home and beat LSU in just a wild game there. On LSU, real quick, why are they ranked in the AP and the coaches? Can somebody explain that to me, please? Why? They're 3-2 in the first month of the season. They've lost to the 2 best teams they've played. I'm not saying that LSU shouldn't be back in the top 25 at some point. I mean, obviously they're 3-2. For all we know, they'll finish 10-2. But how do you justify having LSU still in the rankings today after starting 3-2? I don't understand that. They should not be ranked right now. Win another couple of games, get to 4-2, 5-2, 6-2. Okay, yeah, sure. As other teams start losing games, but I don't understand. You still got undefeated teams that aren't ranked. Why would you have a 3-2 LSU in there? But the AP and the coaches do. I don't. But the AP and the coaches do. I've got Ole Miss at 17. They play Arkansas. They play Arkansas this coming week. I've got Utah at 18. That's where I dropped them down to after losing to Oregon State this past weekend. And Utah's got problems offensively. They've only scored one offensive touchdown in each of the last two games. They need to get Cam Rising back bad. It's going to be hard for Utah to even get to the Pac-12 title game at this point. They've already got one loss in the first month of the season. Southern Cal, Oregon, Washington, no losses. Washington State, no losses. It's going to be hard, I think, now for Utah to even make the Pac-12 title game. But I've got them at 18. Duke, 19. Look, you lose by one touchdown to Notre Dame. What are you going to do? Drop Duke out of the rankings? No. That would be ridiculous. I left Duke at 19. They need to get that quarterback back, though, or they're probably going to lose some more games. We'll see how long he's going to be out for on that. But I've got Duke at 19. Kentucky moved him up to 20. Impressive win against Florida. They're now 5-0, absolutely dominating on the ground this past week against a Florida team that looks like they might be ready to go into give-up mode. We'll see. Now, quarterback-wise, not good for Kentucky. Devin Leary, 9 of 19, something like that. I mean, just not a good day at all. He's gonna have to play better if Kentucky wants to get a win this weekend when they go on the road to play Georgia. But we'll talk plenty about that game later in the week. But Kentucky's 5-0. Blew Florida out behind a dominating ground game and pretty good defense. Got them at number 20. 21, I have UCLA. Their only loss is to Utah. Don't really know how to judge that yet. Utah beats UCLA, then turns around and loses to Oregon State. UCLA, I believe, was off this past week. Anyway, so they still just got the one loss, but I've got them at 21. I've got Missouri at 22. They're also undefeated at 5-0. I've got Louisville at 23. Undefeated, 5-0. I've got Fresno State at 24, undefeated, 5-0. And I've got Kansas State at 25, whose only loss is to undefeated Mizzou, who I have at 22 on a last second field goal. So obviously there are some other teams here I considered putting in the 20 to 25 range. Maryland. I considered Texas A&M still with just still with just the one loss. But they play Bama this week. So, beat Bama, and obviously you're going to be ranked, not just here, but in every other ranking on earth. So I just left them out one more week. Tulane still looks like a pretty good group of 5 team. Air Force, I believe, is undefeated. Thought about putting them in there. Wisconsin still just with one loss. West Virginia, maybe the surprise team of the season. I think they're sitting at 4-1. Unbelievable. Most people had West Virginia only winning 2 or 3 games this year. They're already at 4 wins. Clemson finally beat a Power 5 team, but like LSU, I'm sorry, 3-2 in the first month of the season is not getting you into my top 25. Not when you've still got this number of undefeated and one-loss teams. Just not going to do it, so left them out. But there you go. That's the updated Uncle Lou top 25. I did update the helmet shelves behind me. The bottom shelf has the top 10 on it. The rest of the shelves are just alphabetical order. So I did update the bottom shelves with the new top 10, and I turned the Clemson helmet back the right way. We had the Clemson helmet upside down until they beat a Power 5 team. They beat a Power 5 team. Shout out to the Taters for beating Syracuse. That means everybody's helmet is now turned the right way. So we got to start looking for more reasons to turn helmets upside down, I guess. Anyway, I do appreciate you watching. Make sure you hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you're not, and have a good morning.